doors of the apothecary's bay. Sigmund Point greeted him, the Imperial Fist base in the battle plains, with the smudgy gray mountains in the distance to the west, and the pall of smoke over Kazea to the northeast. Labor servitors were taking delivery of crates of ammunition and supplies from Imperial transport vehicle at the gates. Sergeant Kirav was conducting bolter drills with his fire team, which now included some of the battle brothers from Septurin's squad. The Thunderhawks Peril Swift and Gilded Pyre were parked at the far end of the camp, being refueled under the eye of Brother Gorgathion. Kirov saw Lysander emerging from the bay, and left the fire team running through the sprint and target stance drills. "Captain," said Kirav, "it is good that you are well. We did not think to see you on your feet this day." Lysander looked down at himself. He was without his Terminator armor, and wore simple fatigues. The back of his hand was pink and puckered, a makeshift skin graft to repair his burns. By the tightness of his torso and face, similar grafts covered a percentage of his body. They stung, but that was good. The nerves worked. It was better than having no feeling at all. "At first we thought you were dead," said Kirav. "They thought the Emperor dead when he lay struck down by Horus," said Lysander. "Dorn knew better." "And so we went to the fuel lines and brought you back," said Kirav. "Death will have a damned time getting to Lysander," we said. "We might yet reach him first." "And Legendstrasse?" "Fled," said Kirav. "She left plenty of herself behind in the fire, but we think she got away with all her crucial parts." "Karnakal knew she would survive," said Lysander. "He set the fire. We did not find him either." Lysander pushed his chest out and stretched. The new skin complained. Some muscle had been replaced with hasty nerve fiber bundle implants between his ribs and the tops of his thighs. "We kept our own on office. We drove her away. Legendstrasse will be more desperate now. She will take ever greater risks. We might not have won the laurels of a victory, but we did not fail." "None of us," said Kirav, "have suggested we did." "That is not what I see in this place," said Lysander. "Not what I feel. I know the spirits of my battle brothers, Sergeant. I know their minds. Perhaps none voiced the belief that our brothers are falling in a war which achieved little, but that belief lurks in them. What are our losses at Cray?" "Assault Sergeant Septurin," said Kirav. "Brothers Tesistorn, Cruz, and Escalos from his squad. Skane from Squad Sespen. Lady Sincella fell as well." "I saw her die," said Lysander. "Few of us miss her," said Kirav. "The sentiment, at least, has been voiced. They died fighting a war she created, to hunt down the Assassinorium's mistake. It has angered them." "And I," said Lysander. "But my anger cannot decide how I lead my fellow Imperial fists. Sometimes it is a weapon to be deployed in pursuit of victory, but sometimes it leads us astray. I must swallow that holy rage, so that many Space Marines pursue their own destruction. This is what it means to command. I must make decisions my brothers cannot, such as the follow Sincella against Legendstrasse. Sometimes those decisions cost us the lives of those we call brothers. I know well the anger that will engender the hearts of those same brothers, but I can command them nonetheless." "I understand, Commander." "No, Kirav, you do not. Where is my battle gear?" Kirav pointed at the Thunderhawks. "Still on board the Gilded Pyre, Captain. That was how we brought you back here." "And the Fist of Dorn?" "Recovered alongside you." "That is good. It is a relic of the chapter. An Imperial Fist might lay his life down to bring it back. I give thanks. That much was not required." "Captain," said Sergeant Sespen, emerging from the bunker used for housing prisoners, where Lysander had spoken with Serek before. "Praise the Primarch that you are awake. There is something you must see." "Have you activated it?" said Kirav. "I had assumed it was protected by Machine's cipher." "Not so," said Sespen, "or if it was, such safeguards will deactivate it with her death. What do you speak of?" "It's best that we show you," said Sespen. "It is inside. Inside the bunker, one of the cells stood open. An operating table from the apothecary's suite had been set up in the cell. On the table lay several chunks of scorched flesh, still smelling of cooked meat and fuel. "Lady Sincella," replied Sesfin, "this is all her upper half we recovered. Whatever organ Legendstrasse was using to digest her, she abandoned it in her flight. The chapter serfs recovered something from her remains." He picked up a small metallic device, no longer than a man's finger. "This," he said. "It was buried in the spine. Possibly there were other such devices, but they've been lost. It's a data vault." Sesfin turned to the back of the cell block, where a holomat servitor lay curled against the wall. It was a simple, rugged device, used for displaying tactical maps and important communications. Its biological components were hidden somewhere in a base that supported a long projector arm, now retracted. Sesfin plugged the data vault into a socket in the holomat. The servitor's arm unfolded, reaching up to the ceiling and projecting down a cone of flickering greenish light. The image picked out 3 dimensions and was grainy, but clear enough to show that it was a soaring vault, a mighty temple of shadows and granite. Freezing mist coiled in the air as a procession of adepts, their hoods and robes not quite enough to hide from the ungainly bionics, tramped towards an altar, surrounded by braziers, belching intense smoke. Someone sang a low voice in a mournful dirge, like something from a primitive funeral rite. Each adept carried a body part, a hand, a thigh, a section of ribcage, contained in transparent cylinders filled with blood. On a balcony overlooking the great chamber stood a lone figure in polished black armor, as bulky as full plate from a feudal world, but which moved with every breath as fluidly as water. The armorer's helmet was a skull, and on one hand the figure wore a gauntlet with blades for fingers. "Yverzer," said Lysander. "A Grand Master, perhaps. And that is a suit of shadow-plate armor. It has not been replicated for 1,000 years. The last suits were lost." When the forged Lumas Vex fell, the recording is old, 1,000 years or more. The adepts took the body parts from the containers and began to assemble them on the altar. The adepts had long given up their humanity. Their limbs were wrapped with ribbed bundles of artificial muscle, and their grainy gray skin was stretched over long equine skulls that grinned as they went about their work. Servo skulls tipped with syringes injected each part, as it was laid on the altar, and gradually a naked form took shape. It could have been male or female. It was like a doll or mannequin, without any features that might give it an identity. The head held the only distinguishing figures, for the nose was long and straight, the eyes small, the mouth a thin, severe line. The eyes opened. They were black. A hand shot out and grabbed an adept around his neck. The fist closed around the neck, the adept's head lolling to one side. The figure sat up and sank its teeth the adept's throat, tearing out a grayish mass of muscle. It gulped down, and suddenly another limb was unfolding from its back. A thrashing, spiny tentacle that wrapped around the other adept's torso and whipped it up in the air, slamming it down against the altar. Tendrils shot from the body's mouth and pulled the skull of a third adept apart. Brain matter spilled out. 3 had died in as many seconds. The other adepts fell over one another. In panic, robes and hoods pulled aside to reveal biometrics of their bodies. "Enough!" said the Averser. Instantly, great billows of white gas sprayed from hidden vents in the floor, and frost suddenly covered everything. The adepts fell, their artificial muscles freezing. The naked figure was hidden in the white mist. The image shuddered and was lost in static. It shifted, this time showing a fighter deck on a spacecraft. Huge blast doors sealed off to prevent the vacuum from space. The viewer, presumably a servitor recording proceedings, stood aside, and an airlock door was slammed shut. The viewer continued to watch as several dozen figures ran to the airlock door. The first to reach it wore rust red uniform of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Through the porthole in the airlock, Lysander could see it was a woman, one arm replaced with a bulky servo lifter, her shaved cranium played with circuitry. "If I must die," she cried, her voice muffled through the door, "then let me know. I must know. Knowledge is why I am. It means more than life. Give me this at least before I die. Warning lights flashed around the blast doors behind the tech priest. Others, some tech priests, some menials in simple laborers' uniforms, were rushing in every direction, looking for a way out. Tell me, the tech priest said. The samples. The first templates. They were Xenos, weren't they? Tell me, before I die, tell me. A black-gloved hand slammed down on a control stud. The blast doors boomed open, and a sudden silence flooded the fighter deck. The tech priest was yanked backwards, as the air rushed out, and her body was lost in the blackness of the void, revealed beyond the blast doors. If she had time to scream, the sound was lost in the vacuum. How did Sincella find all this? Said Kirav. Throne knows what a cunning Grand Master of the Assassinorum must possess, said Lysander. Perhaps it was her mission alone to find Legendstrasse, and she pieced together the evidence herself. She left it to make sure that someone would complete her task when she failed. The next image was one of confusion. Lights strobed and distant klaxons sounded. It could have been a scene from a spacecraft or a space station or some industrial facility. Skulls grinning from false pillars, lining the walls and the faltering light that fell on bloodstains in the metal plating of the floor. Troops were running in every direction. They resembled the mind-wiped soldiers of the Imperial Fists. The Imperial Fists that encountered on Opus. But their armor was revealed, their bare arms, which were covered in scrollwork electus. Each man sported a bionic eye linked by a bundle of cables to his hellgun. Move! Someone was yelling. It's behind us! It got around us! Keep moving! How could it get behind us? Someone else cried. The image shuddered and became almost unreadable. Whoever was filming it was running through the doors and labs, at every turn blinded by warning lights, or plunged in the darkness as power failed. Bodies lay torn and broken. Troops tried to force open bulkhead doors that were sealed tight. Emperor preserve! Someone panted, their voice shaking. Emperor preserve! Salve nos, o Imperator! A soldier screamed. He stumbled back, clutching at his face. A mass of pulsing bloody flesh clung to him, devouring him, even as the trooper fell to his knees. The scream choked off to a gurgling rattle. Las fire pulsed, and the trooper's body vanished into a spray of blood and fire. More of them! Came a voice. Everything was motion and noise now. Yelling, las fire, boots on metal, and panicked screams. For a moment the viewer paused at an intersection of corridors. Fleshy masses about knee-high were oozing across the walls and floor. Mewling fanged mouths opened up as they dragged themselves along. With a spasm of muscle, one leapt, shooting past the viewer. The viewer spun and saw another trooper fall back. The pinkish mass lashed into his chest. Las fire streaked into him, punching through his body. He fell, lifeless, the thing that attacked him now, a black and quivering lump. The image focused on the face of one trooper. His helmet was off. Aside from his bionic eye, he looked too human, covered in grime and splattered in blood. They butted off her, he said. Record that. You hear this? When they caught our bodies back to the temple, you tell them they hatched. Dozens of them. And every one of them, every one of us, they kill. They grow. You understand? Got it? Is that what you wanted to know? Is that why you sent us here? Confusion again, screaming and howling. Not all of it human. The trooper who had just spoken running away from the viewer, shooting as he did so. The viewer was on the ground, looking down the corridor, as more of the fleshy young crawled towards him. And behind them, through a tear in the wall, walked a thing with many limbs, folded up around its oversized torso. Multiple hooved feet, carrying it onwards. The most appalling thing about it was not its alien form, or even the way its young were writhing in translucent sacks, hanging in the hollow form by its extended ribcage. It was the unmistakable human face, the woman's face, looking completely calm, as it lumbered towards the fallen soldier who was recording this. The young leapt at him, the image cut out. Static filled the hollow image for a few seconds, and the image went black, and the holomat's projector arm folded back up. So, said Lysander, she breeds. That is why the Assassinorium want the Legendstrasse dead, said Kirav. Because she can create more? The Moaris temple is based around a cycle, said Lysander. As Sincella explained it, Legendstrasse was created to kill whole groups of targets. When one is dead, its biomass can be used to create new weapons to kill more, and so on. Each killing making the Marius more effective. A cycle that goes on until every last target is dead. It seems the Assassinorum neglected to make sure the cycle ended there. One Marius could contain and bring back to the fold, especially one once there's no more biomass available. But a dozen more like her that can harvest their own biomass, that can spread and breed themselves. Worlds could be lost, sectors. If Legendstressa breeds, she will become more than a killing machine. She will become a plague, an intelligent plague that kills because it wants to. No wonder they want her dead, said Kirev. And no wonder they failed, said Lysander. They should have exterminated her. These recordings are ancient. They knew long ago how dangerous one such assassin could be, but they kept her alive. They lost control of her the moment they decided to let her live. Everything that followed was inevitable. Fate was written, this story's end, 1,000 years ago. Lysander looked at Kirev. Do we have news from Chekapov? But little, said Kirev. Just what was distributed from the other commanders. Starfall is a catastrophe. The right flank fell, and the Imperial Army is fighting to keep from being encircled. Fighting is back and forth over Rakaba and Gazeo. There's talk of a fourth front to surround Makasham and cut off the other moral threats Chekapov is certain must be there. The war spreads and continues, said Lysander, as it always will, and it will not end when there is no opus to fight over. That was what the Assassinorium put in place, to give them the best chance of catching Legendstrassa. Lysander's vox chirped. The sound was mostly static. Salith is here, came the voice over the vox, and Lysander recognized the voice of the squadron commander who had accompanied the Imperial thrust, and the Gazeo and K-Day. Commander, can you hear me? Barely, said Lysander, hurrying out of the cell bunker into the hope of getting a better signal. I am using a guard caster, said Salithis. Communication is a shambles. Commander, we have found the works of the enemy beneath Kazeo. Warp gates, living beasts bred to be wrought into portals into the Empyrean. We destroyed one, but there are others. Where are you? In the amphitheater of the Carcelion, said Salithis. We join Imperial forces falling back, but the enemy is counterattacking. Sergeant Salithis' voice broke up into waves of white noise. Sergeant! Squadron Commander, come in. We have lost you, come in. Captain, we're holding here and assisting with the defense. Salithis' voice was very audible, along with the interference, gunfire, and explosions rumbling in the background. But if the enemy's warp gates are opened, there will be no city left behold. Salithis, stay fighting and have faith, said Lysander. You are a beacon to the guardsmen around you. They will not fall while you stand. Do you understand, brother? There was no reply. The box was a howl of static and feedback. Lysander listened for another few seconds to cut the link. Keep monitoring that channel, he said to Sespin. Kirev, make your fire team ready. Are the brothers of Septeran's squad reassigned? They are, Captain, and they have made their oaths of retribution to me. Good. Have Gorgithian take the Thunderhawks. Get them ready for flight. We must go to Gazeo. That is where we began, said Sespin, with a faint air of humor. We took the long way around to go back. Gazeo is where our brothers need help, said Lysander. And, if she really is as desperate as we hope, it is where we will find Legendstrassa too. The raging sky and the cult placed among its crew represented one of the several contingencies put into place by Legendstrassa. There were many other choices. She had been trained to adapt to her situation. More than any temple assassin, Amoris had to be prepared to work with whatever was at hand, for it was assured that she would enter the target zone unarmed, with only her altered physiology to give her the edge over her first kill. Whatever might surround her would have to be her weapon. Thus to Legendstrasse, Opus itself, its society, its Aristia, and its cities, teeming with commoners, were weapons. Before war had come to Opus, as the subjugated servants of chaos seeded the planet at the behest of the official assassinorum, one of those weapons had already been put into action in the foulness and filth of Kazeo's underbelly. Below the commoners, below the debt prisoners and the madmen, sees society's lowest stratum, that no right-thinking citizen of Opus would have the poor taste to mention. They ride through the remnants of the city's siege-filled past, and the burned shells of buildings now buried beneath the grand works of the Aristia. They were human, but they were not. For when one emerged into the light, its worm-like pallid skin and milky eyes were things of horror. These were the crouched rats, who crowd on the bellies through the buried sections of Kazeo, which had been slums and charnel houses before they had been bombed, or burned or crushed beneath the Aristia's new city. Perhaps the crouched rats had always been there. Perhaps they found themselves after fleeing into the underworld, or sinking so low they could not even scrape a sleeping place on a doorway or alley. No one acknowledged they existed. No one cared. Legendstrasse had descended to their world, where the crouched rats gnawed on their dead for food. She read their marks, cut into the skin of corpses, or burned to the walls of collapsed buildings, and learned their territories and pathways. When she saw them, she did not flee in terror or try to kill them. Eventually they stopped fleeing from her, and let her observe them, even as they clawed one another to death over breeding rights, and left body parts to make boundaries. Then she spoke to them. She had learned their language, a handful of growls and yelps, that covered all the subjects needed for a short existence. She said that they were human, that they were just as human as anyone who walked the distant streets of Kazeo, who resided in the spires and palaces which they did not. At first, this city was as much theirs as anyone else's. This city deserved to have done to it what it had done to the crouched rats. Many did not believe her. Many thought she was a god. It did not matter what they thought. Already they had served their purpose, and been primed to fall, just how Legendstrasse needed them when the time came. "Power," said the priest, "pours from both the barrel of a lasgun and the end of a sword. Power oozes from the wounds inflicted on a traitor's body, and from the font of this power is the throne of Terra. All power, all authority, all command, and all obedience radiate from the undying soul of the Emperor on high." The mortars fired from the tangle of ruined tenement blocks outside. The sermon had been long overdue. Attacks by enemy militia on the ground floor entrances had been solid for 3 days, and the spiritual health of the regiment had suffered as a result. The Hecaton lowlanders, placed in Kazeo to act as combat engineers, had been pressed into service instead as infantry, holding the pyramid of Chalcedony throne. The many levels of this necropolis were crammed with tombs and sarcophagi, the burial places of several prominent Aristia bloodlines, who had competed to see the most lavish paintings and sculptures, the most fawning epic poetry, and the most sinisterly lifelike death masks plastered all over the resting places of their ancestors. Each floor was a tight warren, bounded by the faces of the dead, and painted with friezes, and depicting the lavish processions of servants and kneeling commoners. Death was everywhere. The upper floors were forbidden. Something terrible had been found up there, and had been burned. Some soldiers said the Imperial Fists, the Space Marines, had killed it. It was not a place conducive to spiritual health. The lowlanders, kneeling to hear Father Mortuala's sermon, needed his words like they needed clean water and ammunition. Mortulas was not a fighting man, but he wore a las pistol in a holster on the side of his webbing, and a knife sheathed in the other. If it came to it, he would let blood and shed it with the men whose souls he tended. If the Emperor demanded it, the Chalcedony throne forced it, he would fight. He looked down at the faces of the men who listened. 2,000 men were gathered there on the lower floor, which bore the least prestige for the buried, and had been used for storage before its stashes for supplies and weaponry had been looted, early in the fight for Kazeo. From his makeshift pulpit, on low tomb of some lesser functionary, Mortulus could see every face. There was not one he did not recognize. "This war, like all wars, is about power," Mortulus said. "Power belongs to the Emperor. While he slumbers on the golden throne, it belongs to Terra. On Opus, the enemies of Terra seek to take that power. They wish to rule themselves. They call it freedom." Mortulus spat the word as if it were a curse. "But is the usurpation of the Emperor's rule. If the Emperor does not have power over Opus, then it is no longer an imperial world, a human world. It is an enemy world. For the Emperor decreed that all humanity, all the galaxy, must bow to his power. That is all the justification a soldier of the Imperium needs to fight. For the power that must be the Emperor's alone." Mortulus looked closer at the faces lined up in the front of him. Troopers and officers knelt alike. The eyes of most were closed, many looking at the floor. A few wept. Several were marred by fresh wounds and bandages. "We have lost friends," said Mortulus. "We might call their loss a sacrifice, but none of them looked for their deaths. None of them laid down and let the enemy take them. They fought to survive and were cut down in battle. So is this truly a sacrifice when it is not looked for? Their sacrifice is not their death, but the acceptance of the galaxy. They must live on as a soldier. When we win a battle, it is not we who win in the glory, for as the glory is due to the Emperor. It is not we who are happy, for we are lost of our own. Even in victory, we are laid low. No, you soldiers, and those who have fallen, accept that sorrow and pain will befall them. Death and injury is part of that. But no man escapes even a great victory unwounded. That is the sacrifice the fallen have made, and that you have all made. That was your choice. The reward for that choice is the Emperor's grace, a gift that can only manifest to the faithful. It is not like a payment, like a coin to a sellsword. It is not a promotion, like a contract. The very act of sacrifice brings you grace. Not everyone can make that decision. You brave and you few can make it. Explosions sounded nearby, the familiar crack of mortar rounds fired from the depths of the cemetery district. Mortulus waited for the volley to finish, and for the sound of falling debris to lie down, as it pattered against the side of the Chalcedonian throne's pyramid. "In battle, our worlds shrink," continued Mortulus. "We can conceive of nothing beyond our foxhole and our firing loop. We comprehend no one but ourselves and the friends immediate around us. But even then, in the concentrated world of war, we must not forget that this power, for which we fight, is the domain of the Emperor, and that none dwell in that domain without hope. Above all, even death in the dark, there is hope." Explosions rattled again, this time closer, shaking dust from the ancient walls. Mortulus had to steady himself to get to his feet. A couple of Hecton lowlanders opened their eyes and looked around nervously as the sound got closer. Then, another sound, stone on stone, grinding, coming from overhead. The stone coffin under Mortulus' feet rocked, forcing the paving slabs away from it. Mortulus jumped down as the lid cracked. The other tombs on the lower level, mostly of favored servants and ill-favored lesser relatives, were also cracking open. The smell of ancient death, of mold and decay, rolled out. The lowlanders jumped to their feet and fumbled to bring their guns to bear. Officers shouted for calm and order, to quell any panic. "So," said Mortulus, "the enemy raised the dead. We had known this would come to pass. We had waited for it. This is the reckoning that was fated to us." Mortulus drew his las pistol. He was an unfit and aging man, wearied by illness and an arduous career, but he looked ready to fight. Sarcophagi shattered, guardsmen fell or ducked for cover. What emerged was not the dead, not the mummified remains of past Aristia, hung with gold and wielding the weapons buried with them. What emerged were the crouched rats. Their skin were pale and patchy, their frames shrunken with disease. They scurried like animals. Their eyes were screwed shut, for in the weak light of the Chalcedonian throne they were blinded, but it did not matter. They were born fighting blind. "Heretics!" cried Mortulus. "Put them to the sword! put them to the flame! Dozens of the crouched rats poured out of the shattered tombs and holes that suddenly opened up in the ground. As soon as they emerged, they were cut down. Las postal sidearms and combat knives did for the first few that emerged. By the time the next few made it out, many of the guardsmen had their las guns ready, and the rats were picked off before they slithered their way out of the hiding places. There were a lot of them, and they did not seem afraid to die. These ragged people, as pale as worms, were apparently unarmed and determined to present themselves as targets to the Hecton lowlanders. Officers called for disciplined fire, and to keep out of each other's lines of sight. Another died, 2 las shots through his torso. Another one, leg shattered at the thigh. Another, crawling as his abdomen split open, shot through. Another lurched up, when thought dead, and grappled with the guardsman trying to wrench the lance gun from his hands. It was thrown down and clubbed with the butts of his fellow soldiers' guns, its head caved and its body twitching. They saw a chunk of rock, glassy and black, implanted in the center of its chest. None of them thought it might mean anything. Perhaps when the influx of enemies was done, and they were all dead, they would examine the bodies and wonder why. But that would wait until the killing was done with. One crouched rat did not die easily. It was much larger than the rest, its skin heavily scarred, and its rope belt hung with human jawbones. He reared up as another shot caught him in the chest, and punched right through him. His lips drew back over bare teeth. His eyes opened, to show sockets were hollow, the eyeballs scooped out, leaving red-black pits. His tongue was forked, and it flickered from its mouth as he yelled wordlessly. The chunk of rock in his chest glowed. Green light bled out, and arced to the floor like electricity. The crystals implanted in the other corpses did the same, their power congealed above them, forming a layer of trapped light. "Fall back," said Mortualus. "This is witchcraft. Guard your souls." The leader of the crouched rats laughed, a horrible raking sound from his torn throat. The skin of his chest blackened, his charred ribs showing through. More las shots blew off an arm and ripped a chunk out of its shoulder. It did not die. It was still alive when the disk of light tore open, and madness bled through. A caged portal to another realm, a doorway to the warp, appeared as reality tore open. The guardsmen were in retreat, heading for the exits from the Chalcedonian throne's lower floors. Those nearest the portal were robbed of their senses, their eyes struck blind and their minds scoured clean. They dropped, minds wiped. Others went mad and turned their guns on their fellow soldiers, or, if they still possessed some spark of awareness, on themselves. Some fell to their knees and gave thanks that they had witnessed the realm of chaos. Some survived and ran, the regimental vox operators already warning nearby units of a moral threat manifesting at the Chalcedonian throne. The gate was short-lived, a makeshift work of sorcery that drained the life force of the crouched rats in minutes. Those minutes were all it took for Carnical Sixfinger, the world eater champion of corn, to stride through the doorway into the heart of Kazeo. Alongside him, like pack hunters following their alpha, were a host of bloodletters, foot soldier demons of corn, their muscular shapes dripping with scalding blood, as their swords of black iron humming with the need to kill. Behind them was one of the warp gate beasts, the golems of corpses, raised below the city, its legs folded under, as it forced its way through the gateway, into the relatively cramped space of the Chalcedonian throne's lower floor. The bloodletter set about executing the guardsmen who still survived. It was sorry work, for the guardsmen were driven mad, or witless by the glimpse of the warp. The bloodletter's blades took every head, from guardsman and crouched rat, and threw them to a bloody heap. The only light now was the molten glow of Carnicle's armor, and the fires of the demon's eyes. "Are you satisfied?" bellowed Carnicle. "Now that I have swapped one master for another, the corpse god's killers for you? Has your pet done well? You promised me sport. You promised me skulls. I shall take yours instead if you cannot deliver." "Threats mean nothing, Sixfinger," came a reply, a calm female voice. Carnicle took a small mirror from an ammo pouch on his belt and held it up to the bleeding light from his armor. It reflected on the face of the woman, who he could be forced to call master for a few hours more. "I care not for your god, or for the honor of a world eater. Your tally of skulls means nothing to me. I care only that you serve as you are bound. Kill me, and you are released from my service, if it pleases you. It will be most educational to see you try. For now, do your part. You stoke my rage, Legistrasse, replied Carnicle. Those few who dared to do so now adorn my armor, and they live still, trapped in their skulls, to witness the anger they provoked. Play your part in the summoning of the tower, said Legistrasse, and be ready for my arrival. The amphitheater of Carcillion was much more a monument to excess, as it was a venue for many sports and entertainments of Gazale. Seating for upwards 100,000 citizens was crouched in the soaring archways of the stadium. With the flag of every house the Aristia flying, marble of hundreds of different colors made up the structures in an eye-watering clash, only accentuated by the glint and hanging silks of the most exclusive areas, where Aristia nobles once lounged to be waited and entertained. The arena had in the past been adapted for everything, from staged sea battles to lavish plays, and weddings and assumption ceremonies of Gazale's most exalted Aristia. Now it was a great circle of beaten earth transformed into a military camp, where thousands of Imperial Guard were sheltered against the siege growing outside the stadium walls. The golden colors of the two Imperial Fist Vindicator tanks stood out against the camouflage drab of the polluted and deletion vehicles. Imperial Guard Chimera APCs were parked where they had dropped off dozens of guardsmen, fleeing the advance of enemy forces. A couple of Basilisk self-propelled artillery pieces were having their guns calibrated to lob over the stadium walls into the streets outside. The most likely ways were covered by Lehman Russ battle tanks, dug in and surrounded by sandbags to serve as gun emplacements. The guardsmen in the stadium looked up as the whine of engines approached. A pair of golden gunships, like great mechanical eagles, swooped down and encircled their pilots. The Gilded Pyre and the Peril Swift came in to land along the camo netting and ammunition stores of the makeshift camp. Lysander jumped down from the Gilded Pyre. He felt the reaction of the guardsmen when they saw him. Amazement, and more than a little fear. The rest of the Imperial Fist Strike Force disembarked behind him. Sergeant Selethus ran to meet them. "Well met, my captain," he said with the salute of forearm clapped across his chest. "The situation at Gazale grows more dire with every minute. The enemy is getting unprecedented numbers from somewhere. Major assaults are underway in all areas. They seek to drive us out of the city, Captain. But they face the masters of the siege, the Imperial Fists, and we shall hold fast. They seek," said Lysander, "to pin us in place, while Legenstrasse can escape. This as far as Opus's moral threats are concerned. This city and this planet can go to the hells, because they will have won. Gorgithian!" "Captain," said Gorgithian, as he swung himself down from the cockpit of the Gilded Pyre, "what is your opinion on the air defenses we observed?" "The enemy has not been lax in their work," said Gorgithian. "Deeper into the city, flak guns and air defense lasers have been adapted. We encountered little, but further in it would be hazardous indeed to mount an air operation. I understand the Imperial Navy have already learned that to cost." "We may have to take that risk," said Lysander, "if we need to move against Legenstrasse quickly." "You are certain she is in Gazale?" said Librarian Dephobius, exiting the Thunderhawk behind Lysander. "Nothing on Opus is certain," said Lysander. "But we must place ourselves where she is most likely to break cover, and she will most likely do so in Gazale. This is where the enemy is making their move. If Sergeant Selethus is discovered, Legenstrasse was working with Opus's moral threats at Cray. If she is working with them here..." Lysander's words were cut off, as a tremendous explosion shattered the upper levels of one side of the amphitheater. Marble masonry rained down, and guardsmen fled the falling wreckage. A Lehman Russ was buried by a great marble spur that shattered against it, hiding everything in a pall of dust. "They're starting!" yelled an officer in the uniform of the lieutenant of the 4th Pilatus Shock Army. "Man the fixed guns! Reserve men, draw to the center!" The lieutenant turned to his Imperial Fists. "My lord, will you fight alongside us this day?" "We will," replied Lysander. "My thanks, Lieutenant Fordich, 4th Plautus. Captain Lysander, Imperial Fist first." Fordich looked young for an officer. Quite possibly, he'd attained his rank through the opaque politics of the Imperium's officer class, rather than the battlefield experience. He went to the other men under him, who wore the uniforms of a dozen different Guardian regiments. He was pointing at the Imperial fist, and Lysander saw a mix of awe and gratitude in their faces. When they fought alongside the Space Marines, an Imperial Guardsman felt like the Emperor himself was beside them. It was one more weapon in the Space Marines' arsenal. Kirav! Ordered Lysander. Join the reserve. We will have need of you if the enemy breaks through. Sesfin, Orvos. I shall be at the walls with you. Ukugan, be where the Emperor's blade is needed. Gorgithian, get the Thunderhawks in the air, but bring them down rather than take fire. We will need them later. And Selethis, Captain, have you calibrated for indirect fire? We have, Captain. Then lend your might to the artillery. To battle, my brothers. Legistrasa thinks she will slow us down here, but she merely hands us her allies to die. Near the damaged section of the stadium, great booming explosions rumbled, and the whole building shuddered. An Aristia banner fell and fluttered from the upper reaches. Imperial Guardsmen were forming firing lines, staggered across the arena floor. The pink fire of her wings was what told them it was her. Like a rising dawn, the flame crested the summit of the wall, and bathed the amphitheater with rose-pink light. The Paladins recognized her feathers, and the strips of skin waving from her scalp. Word got out that she was Antiocha Wyrax, once a witch, now a fusion of demon and woman. Those who had seen her and survived were a combination of blessed and cursed. They had been among the few that survived her appearance on K-Day, so they were lucky. But perhaps they used up their luck on that day. Perhaps Wyrax, the phoenix of Kazael, would come looking for them. She rose over the stadium, the long wings draping down over the uppermost spires. The artillery pieces threw explosive shells over the walls in that direction, and the din of battle mixed with the strange humming song of power that emanated from Wyrax herself. She raised a hand and cast a bolt of pink fire, a burst of flame, billowing upwards like a blossoming flower, and enveloping a handful of guardsmen trying to bring a heavy bolter to bear. A second bolt of sorcery lands through one of the Duggan tanks, and the ammunition detonated, blasting shrapnel in every direction and a rattle of statico explosions. "Stay on the ground!" yelled Lysander to Gorgithian as he ran towards the wrecked wall. "I must take flight!" shouted Gorgithian in response. "I fought her once, I can do it again!" "Stay on the ground, brother. That is an order." Lysander and Sesfin were running to the breach. Guardsmen were already clambering up the seating to get to the breach. Gunfire was sounding from there, raised voices and screams. Wyrax had been accompanied on K-Day by living biological weapons. The guardsmen had all pulled their gas masks. The Plutons and Kergalans among them said prayers of retribution over their guns. The enemy broke through the breach in a tide of struggling flesh. They were almost naked but feral. They had once been citizens of Kazael. Perhaps a few of them had been Imperial Guard, captured, brutalized, and changed by Wyrax. Whatever they had been, they were now the enemy. They fought with blades of bone that had grown from their hands. Bone fanned through their torn bluish skin, deformed plates over their chest and shoulders. Their eyes were red, as if from burst blood vessels. Their tongues were bundles of tendrils like sea anemones, and under their skin writhed translucent pods, squirming with life, eager to get out. "Hand of Dorn, guide us! Fist of Dorn, crush them!" Lysander led the charge with a war cry, sprinting the 100 meters across the arena floor towards the breach. The Imperial Guard guns cut down a dozen of the enemy in the first few seconds, and spore-filled organs inside them burst, filling the air with an orange biological haze. The Imperial lasguns fell silent for a moment as officers yelled to fall back and take up second firing positions. Lysander charged right into the haze and felt the filters in his nose and throat contracting as they recognized airborne toxins. The first horror loomed out at him. The man's face was split vertically, bony shards and white sicilla poking through the wound. He drew back a bulbous fist, the swollen and heavy with cysts, primed to burst and deliver shards of biotoxin. Lysander hit the heretic so hard in the midriff with the fist of Dorn that his deformed arm was torn off, and his torso was smacked away across the arena. Lysander swung back and knocked the legs out from another heretic who charged at him. This one's forearms were mutated to twist together into a bony spear, like the ram of a ship, and blue crystals of congealed venom glistened along its cutting edge. Lysander swept the stricken mutant aside with a sweep of his shield. Ukugan ran past him, heading for the upper seating and higher ground. His duty of Emperor's champion meant he had to go for the flying sorceress, who was even now detonating the polluting tanks with bolts of pink fire. A sniper shot blew the arm off another mutant beside Lysander. A second hit in the jaw, and it sheared off. The mutant fell in a spray of corrupted purple-black blood. Lysander knew it was from Scout Anarin, perched somewhere along the decorative marble surrounding the Aristeus section of the building. Toxin shards burst against Lysander's armor. One grazed his face, and he felt the burning of the toxin diving into his blood. And the flame rippled across his face, already tight and painful from the burns he received at Cray. It raced down his neck and into his chest, where his twin hearts hammered faster. Then it receded, forced back into pockets and crushed by the immune system of a space marine, filtered out by his grown organs, broken down into harmless components or expelled through his pores and lungs. Sides of bone were flung at him, propelled by snapping bundles of muscle, bunched around the chest and shoulders of one of the mutants. They hit his shield, and were shattered to dust by the suppression field around it. The mutants rushed him at once, but Lysander crunched the fist of Dorn into the pelvis of the first, crushing the second to the floor with his shield, and dodged around the bone axe of the third. Bolter fire was punching through the enemy at will. Squad Sesfin advanced steadily, half the brothers kneeling to fire volleys while the others moved up. In the breach ahead, 100 more mutant heretics were forcing their way in, and half of them were dead to the explosive fire raking through them as they were inside the amphitheater. Lysander dived into them, and it was good. It was good to feel the enemy, an honest enemy, one who knew to be a foe of mankind to the death, crushed and broken beneath the fist of Dorn. It was good to feel them break against his shield, and see them mown down by the guns of his battle brothers. Another foe ran at him. They were desperate to die. Lysander ducked to one side and caught the enemy in his shield, flipping the mutant over his head, and dumping it to lie face down the blood-slick ground behind him. He turned to dive the fist of Dorn down to the mutant's skull. "Captain, stop!" shouted Librarian Dephobius to the carnage. "A moment with him! Just a moment!" Lysander paused and nodded at the Librarian. Dephobius crouched by the heretic. Lysander knelt beneath Dephobius, holding up his shield to ward off the worst of the bone and toxin shards raining down from the breach. Dephobius placed a hand against the heretic's skull. Lysander saw with distaste that larvae were squirming under the skin of the mutant's back. Things like toothed worms that forced against the skin, if they had a moment left to latch out on that doomed body. Dephobius screwed his eyes shut, and Lysander knew that the librarian's mind, compartmentalized and ordered by years of mental exercise, was engaging the heretic's mind, in a contest the heretic had no hope of winning. "They are trying to keep us here," said Dephobius. "That's it. It doesn't matter if they survive, or even if they kill us. They just want to keep us here." "As we thought," said Lysander. A screech from above caught Lysander's attention. Wyrax was wheeling overhead, swooping over Uhogan, as the Emperor's champion perched on a lone arcing spur of marble that reached out over the arena seating. Wyrax lashed Uhogan with fire. Uhogan clung tight and weathered it, holding on even as the flame threatened to throw him down to the arena floor. The Phoenix of Hazael swept around from another pass, her trailing feathers coiling behind her. Uhogan left off the arch and landed on Wyrax, grabbing a handful of tendrils protruding from her scalp. Her face was screwed up in pain and dismay. She lost altitude suddenly, the weight of an armored space marine throwing her off course. Uhogan twisted his hand, winding it deeper into her tendrils, and wrenched her head up. Wyrax aimed upwards, lost speed and fell, spiring like a crippled jet, as Uhogan held on. "Kirov! Help Uhogan!" ordered Lysander into the Vox. "Clip the arch-heretic's wings!" We will ground her for good, came Kirov's reply. Lysander could just see, through the biological haze surrounding the breach, a glint of golden armor as Kirev's veteran squad ran towards the multicolored blaze of the Phoenix's crash site. Dephobus had to put a hand on Lysander's shoulder guard. There is a disturbance, he said. An exhalation of the warp. Reality recoils. The whole city shakes with it. From Wyrax? Said Lysander. No, said Dephobus. Look to the sky. Beyond the walls. Look to the sky. Lysander broke from cover, carrying his shield before him as he ran towards the breach. Bone spies thudded into his armor. He ignored them, just as he ignored the heretics who rushed at him. He knocked them aside or ran them over, trusting Dephobus and Squad Sesfin to deal with those who threatened him. He reached the breach, a great crack in the amphitheater's outer wall, where heretics were still clambering through. Lysander knocked the head off one, who leered through the crack at him. Then he placed a foot on torn masonry and pushed himself up. He